I want to talk about an issue that most people don't want to face. The issue is racism in this country and trying to dialogue with people who will be impossible to understand why racism will be persistent in this country, in this world. What makes it tick? What makes it tick is the fact that you cannot separate racism from white people. See, people want to make you feel guilty when you question or challenge whiteness and call it unfair, unjust. You think that you're going to reach inside and make them understand. That's basically a wishful thought, because whiteness is racist by default. You're not going to get rid of it. The only way to get rid of it is to end it, to destroy it. And why try to live among something that you can never be equal with? And the reason why I'm saying this to you, and why you're seeing this now, what we're looking into is a time of judgment. The judgment time is here. So you can't play with this anymore. And let me give you a good example, and let's see if you can digest this. When you say people of color, human beings, you're talking about the color spectrum of the sun, people of the sun. That's what color is, where it comes from. And when you say people of the sun or people of color, and then you say white people, white is a color. Now, for someone to not connect that situation, who is supposed to be so intelligent, scientific, logical, rational, all these things that they like to attach to themselves, and then let you say people of color and leave out the fact that white is a color. So when you say people of color and then you say white, and then you want people of color to say we're equal, we're people, we're just different on that level. No. When you say people of color and you say white is not person of color, what you're saying is you're saying that white is anti-color. It's not biologically anything inside of them that would say they're white. There's no DNA white. There's no reason why you would call yourself white as if you are condemned to being white, because whiteness is only an ideology. So the idea that the ideology of white only means that the people who describe that situation, who are not any biblical scholars, these were people who were pseudoscientists who themselves created the ideology of separating the people, which is not what the people who are supposed to be Christian were supposed to be doing. So when they come up with the classification of race, they have placed themselves in a position of being the pure, the one who follows the law, who is the one who is without fault, pure, all these things that show perfection, and then say that they are Christians. How can you be both? How can you be born pure and perfect and then be a born sinner? This is the type of ridiculous nonsense that we've basically sucked up and taken to believe that we can see it and not understand that it's something in your face, a truth in your face. Because it's anti-Christian to call himself white. It's not biblical. It's not in the Bible. The Bible that they claim to follow, the Bible that they've pushed on the rest of the world, that's not what they believe. So when they could say that I'm white and you're a person of color and not be offended by that terminology by saying I'm a person of color too, white's a color. I'm the scientific one. I already know that white is a color. It's definitely a color. It's part of the coloring, the U, which is what makes humans. H-U-E. Like womb makes woman from man. You color man. So what you're saying when you're saying white, you're saying you're not human. That's what they're saying. So you never get that from anyone who believes to be white and accept it. Now there's people who are, but they don't have the whole gist of what that means. They just say it because it's just been put on them to be able to live, like being born a slave. Just don't question it. You were born a slave and you will die a slave. That type of mindset. And because it's so convenient, because white has not been on a position of being on the defensive or being in a position of being treated as a second class person or in a defensive situation, that they don't need to change that. Whereas you have people of color, black, they call themselves Moors or Islam or Muslims or Indians or Hebrews or black, African American, Negro. All these terminologies that say that I'm different than that one. Don't put me here or whatever, because somehow that's going to rise you above the situation. But it's not. So in order to deal with racism, in order to deal with what it is, you have to understand that you cannot change that what does not want to change. White doesn't want to change. It's worked too well for them. So when you say the police, you're saying they're good cops and they're bad cops. Well, you could say that there's good white people and there's bad white people. Same thing. Because the cop scenario are the white people. So they can lure you into a false sense of security. But all in all, even when you see black politicians, black entertainers, black church clergy, all this has to do with an extension of white power. you speak English. English comes from Western Europe. So the whole concept of even thought comes from a Western European mindset. So as a black person, person of color, speaking English only, Spanish only, Portuguese only, it's impossible to be racist when you speak in the person whose racism you are living language. You're not changing anything. What's racism when you are speaking their language? You're learning their customs. Where is the racism at in that? Where would be the reverse racism, as they like to say, in that? It's no, doesn't make any sense. See, when they speak of the law, they talk about the scales and blind justice. They're not speaking as a blanket situation. They're speaking as a criminal conspiracy where they've rigged the game. There's nothing about the law that's basically sacred or anything that's new. The laws of the United States that they put together from 1776 came from Europe, back in the days of the Magna Carta, back in the days of the philosophers who were going against the kings that were ruling then, that they didn't like the monarchs. So they come up with this humanistic or ideology of man's natural rights. So when they came to this country and they decided to rebel as the British citizens, they basically took on a philosophy that had been going through or going around Western Europe for a couple of centuries already. Going back as far as the rebellion of King Henry VIII when he wanted to break away from the church and create the first church in order to kill his own wife, to marry another woman. That's the type of religious respect they have. So this whole idea of men's free will and thinking, it's not nothing that was thought about in the rooms when they were coming together with the Declaration of Independence. This stuff was already talked about. So what it gave the people of Europe that thought like that or understood or had that type of leaning, it gave them something to argue with, something to give them the backing of what they were doing here, which is basically robbing the British colony of their property. And then they call it a rebellion or it goes into a revolution, which could not have been about freedom because they never freed the people who were the most subjected to being in bondage. But then they spin it to the point where the argument is so loud that they'll cry over or yell over the people who are still crying in chains. Screaming to the hills, freedom and liberty, while people cry for mercy. That's not freedom. That's not liberty. It's a criminal enterprise. It's crimes against humanity. So when you see how the structure of the law was put together, it was put together in a situation of a fraud, a perpetuated fraud. And this fraud itself was perpetuated so long till you speak the language, you learn all the definitions and all the philosophies and all of the ways of the person who offended you the most, to the point that somehow it makes it just, in the sense that the law, because they keep saying the law. Well, there are laws that are beyond their laws, because their laws are man-made, and once a law has been broken, it's no longer a law. Because the law holds itself as consistent. The sun revolves around the earth, or the earth revolves around the sun. The law of gravity. Now you can define the law if you can, but the law stays in its position because it's made to be consistent. But once you start taking the law and you're able to move it left and right, up and down, it's no longer the law. So there's no reason to hold you accountable for laws that don't exist. In the Declaration of Independence, it speaks about abusive government, abusive power. When it's time for a people to throw off the shackles, the chains of abusive government and set their own up. It's in there. So when we talk about this country itself, we're not talking about something that is divinely inspired. This place, this country, was created for judgment. And they're not the judge. You're the judge. They have been weighed on a scale. You want to talk about the law? I'll give you the law. Guilty. Sentence? Death. Whiteness has to die. If you can't accept it, then you have a problem. Whiteness is not anything but a means of being anti-human. And many of them will not accept it because they're so perfect in their thoughts and their belief, twisted left and right, never wrong, even if they're wrong, to the point where they're not going to accept it. But it doesn't take them to accept something to be true ought to be carried out. Question is, why is not white not a color? How is white Christian when it's anti-Christian in its definition? Why have they made fools of you to say something that's basically telling them that they're better than you? White created nigger. If nigger's bad, how is white good? If white created nigger. Black people weren't niggers when they got here, but they became niggers when white people created white. So as long as white exists, so does nigger. So you should be able to stand proud on yourself, knowing that it's up to you to end it. No one can define what it takes to do what you need to do. They want war. They love killing. They love death. That's why I wear this. The death mask. The death. You want war? You never see me coming. You're already done. It's done already. It's over. I own your soul. That's the law.